This is really testing my pregnancy brain. Bumblebee? Wendell Bumblebee? And that is such a mouthful. I feel like if I could describe my reading taste to you, it's cozy fantasy and classic romance. That is it. That is what I could read forever. Think of cottages and roaring fires and smoky chimneys. It's like just those kind of lovely fantasy feels. So I thought this video would be so much easier to set up than it is, but it turns out that I haven't been updating my reading log on any of the books I've read lately, so I'm having to go back through Goodreads and write down all of the books I've read over the last few months. Thankfully, however, I did actually mark everything on Goodreads, including the dates that I actually finished reading the books, so past me did at least plan that far. Okay, now I've just got to find all the books on my bookshelf. Also, please acknowledge how cute it is that I now have baby clothes hanging on my bookshelves. This wasn't placed there on purpose, it just got put there and I haven't put it away. But now I think this definitely should be the baby's wardrobe backdrop. Very cute. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today's video is going to be a really big reading wrap up. So this video might be going up a little bit later than I had originally planned because morning sickness has definitely been winning the battle lately. If you didn't see on my last video, just for context, I'm pregnant and by the time this video goes up, I'm going to be about 16 weeks pregnant. I'm almost 16 weeks now, and I have been waiting for that moment that everyone tells me is going to come, where you just wake up one morning and you feel great, and I haven't had that. I did think I was getting better this week because I didn't really have much morning sickness all week. And then this morning I just woke up and felt awful, had to rush to the toilet and have just been feeling off all morning. I just about managed to get myself up, brush my hair, put some makeup on, wear some clothes, even if clothes right now is Johnny's shirts. And basically I'm just wearing Johnny's clothes because all that really fits me and is comfortable is leggings. And to wear my leggings, I have to wear oversized clothes. So I'm just living in baggy dresses and Johnny's clothes, basically. I wanted to update you on all of the books that I have been reading over the last few months. I think the last time I did a reading wrap up was for February. I think I wrapped up January and February's books in the beginning of March. And since then, I don't think I've talked about any of the books I've been reading, other than maybe one or two of them in reading vlogs. I don't think I've talked about anything that I've read. And even though I haven't read loads of books, I talked about this in last week's video, that I've been really struggling to focus on reading. Even though I haven't been reading loads of books, I do have a little stack, and I just wanted to share what I have been reading because I've read some good books actually, and one of them probably a new favourite. So let's get straight into the first book, which I read in, I'm just trying to find it now. So I read this book in March, so 3rd of March I finished this book, and that was Sweet Bean Paste by Jurian Sukagawa. I don't think I've talked about my thoughts on this book yet. I was definitely expecting that this book was going to be quite fluffy and light and sweet and innocent in a way, and it was actually a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be. Like, it was that, but it was also deep. So in this book we follow an ex-criminal called Sentaro, and he begins working in a dorayaki shop. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but this is a type of sweet bean paste filled pancake, I believe. And he is just working there so that he can pay off the wife of the shop owner who he owes some money to, or owes a kind of debt to, and he's just ticking away his days feeling like he is an absolute failure. And everything changes when an older woman comes and wants to work in the shop with him, and this woman has a disfigured hand, and in this, you know, culture at this time that this book is set, this would absolutely turn people off from wanting to eat food there. And this is kind of unpacked as the story goes on. But he wants her in because she is absolutely amazing at making the sweet bean paste, to the point where the shop is turning around its sales and becoming an actual viable business again. So we follow the kind of friendship that forms between Sentaro and this older woman, and exploring kind of what happened to her and the prejudices and judgment around people like her in Japanese society at this time. So at the beginning of this book, I thought it was really nice and charming, but it was also maybe a little bit boring. I think I often get this in shorter novels where I'm kind of thinking, this is nice, but where is this story going? However, the depth of the story is really built on in the second half of the book, and it becomes a really haunting and raw story rather than just like a charming little story about a bakery. I really loved the way this book depicts freedom and the kind of comparison between Sentaro, who feels trapped in the role that he's doing, and the trapped cage that this older lady is in due to her condition. And it just weaves all of those themes of kind of freedom and loneliness and wanting to do something with your life and feeling trapped by society and yourself. It just wraps all of that up in a really beautifully sad way at the end. And what began as kind of a mediocre book for me, I ended up really valuing, and I think I gave this book overall a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. However, the next book that I picked up was probably the best book I have read this year since Jane Eyre. This book was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I've wanted to read this book for so long. It's been on my to-read list for years. I've owned this copy for probably a decade. I absolutely love the BBC miniseries adaptation. If you haven't seen that before, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's so lovely. This story follows Margaret Hale, who has had to move from the south of England to the north of England because her father, who was a vicar, has had some issues with the Church of England and decided to step away from his role as a vicar and become a teacher. And he kind of uproots his family up to a town called Milton. I think it's Milton. And this is a very industrial northern town with lots of mills and industry booming. And Margaret soon comes into contact with one of the mill owners called Mr. Thornton. And this book it's about a lot of things, actually, this book. There's so many themes. I didn't really study this book as I was reading it, but I made so many notes and annotations in it as I was going, because I feel like it is definitely a book that you could study and get so much out of it. Themes around faith and religion, themes around prejudice, themes around social status and money, and just so many things in this book that are juxtaposed in so many of the characters and so many of the storylines, and explored with such a delicate lens that I was so amazed at this story. And it just expanded on the miniseries for me so much. The romance in the story is definitely what absolutely makes it for me though. It's very Pride and Prejudice-esque. I think Mr. Thornton and Margaret are very Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth in their kind of storyline. The book sometimes switches as well between Margaret's perspective and occasionally goes into Mr. Thornton's perspective, and I just think that added so much to the story because you got to read his pining for her and his just adoration of her, and then in her perspective you're reading how frustrating he is and how he just seems to be annoyed at her all the time. And I just think the fact that it goes into his perspective as well at times just made this book so romantic and really did that kind of slow burn romance so much better than if we just had Margaret's perspective. So really, really thoroughly recommend this if you're a fan of classics and particularly romantic classics. Then changing the theme very slightly, I then read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, and I forgot to say I gave North and South 5 stars. So then I read this book. This book was so lovely and I really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad because there is a sequel, I believe, coming out next year. I think it's going to be a series, and I'm so happy because this is just the epitome of a cozy fantasy book. It's not, it's not got lots of battles, it's not really intense, there's no super complex magic system, it's just cozy and warm. This book is written in diary format, and we're following our main character Emily Wilde, who is, I believe, the youngest Cambridge professor, I think, of Cambridge University. I think it's Cambridge. I can't find it in the blurb, but from memory, she is the youngest Cambridge University professor, and is in this sort of alternate version of our history. There is widespread belief that fairies do exist, and it is a research topic. There are scholars and professors and leading experts in the study of fairies, and this is what she is a professor of, and she is trying to create the world's first Encyclopedia of Fairies. And so she travels in this book to where does she travel to? This is really testing my pregnancy brain. She travels to a village somewhere, it feels like Iceland or some kind of cold place like that, and rents a little cottage there so that she can go and seek out the last of the fairies that she needs to research in order to finish this encyclopedia. However, things start to go a little bit awry when her academic rival, Bamblebee, and that is such a mouthful. Wendell Bamblebee ends up arriving to say he is also coming to support this research because it's gonna kind of benefit them both to do this together. And he is one of the most brilliant characters in this book and absolutely makes it. I massively enjoyed this book. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I can't remember why I didn't give it 5 stars. Perhaps I'm just saving myself for that second book and hoping it will get better. But yeah, the romance was lovely, but not too in your face at the forefront. The magic was lovely, but again, not too intense and complicated. Also, this book does have a lot of footnotes of fake books and like fake references, as if you are kind of exploring an academic world that existed. I just loved the creativity of it, so would thoroughly recommend this if you want a cozy fantasy book. I feel like this selection of books I've read is so random. We had we had historical fiction, a classic, a fantasy, and then the next book I read was a non-fiction which was on boundaries. I can't remember the full title of the book. This was a book all about boundaries, and particularly from a Christian faith perspective, and I really enjoyed this book. I'd actually done a training course on boundaries and just found it really fascinating, thinking about the way our brain works in terms of setting boundaries. And so I read this book, which is by two doctors or two psychologists, and they kind of talk around the sort of science of boundaries, but also how that relates to Christians as well, and maybe some of the challenges that Christians do face when it comes to setting boundaries. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so interesting, it really challenged me. It took me so long to get through because every chapter I read felt like I'd gone for a therapy session, but I really valued reading that book. I don't know if I gave it a rating, but if I was to give it a rating, it would probably be like a 4 or a 5 stars, because it really was exactly the kind of stuff I needed to read at that time. The next book that I read was A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. And this is a historical romance. Again, a new genre. I was definitely going through a bit of a varied reading year this year. So this is a historical romance about a young woman called Kitty. I believe her family's parents die, and she's the oldest sibling. She has all these sisters, and she needs to make some money for her family, and she decides that the way to do this is to marry rich. And so she decides to come out into society and find herself a rich husband. It's a really lovely and funny book. The romance was nice. I thought the family relationships and dynamics that are explored were really nice as well. And it just felt like a wholesome kind of book. I feel like a lot of romances at the moment are very, like, I don't know, spicy and going right in there for the romance part of the story. Whereas this just felt wholesome, clean. I like the historical romances where it's more about, you know, romanticizing the holding of hands or the kind of glances across a ballroom. And this book definitely did that. The only things that I was not so much of a fan of in this book, I found it to be quite slow. I found it to be very predictable. Which is sometimes a comforting thing. I didn't mind it, but I would have appreciated a few little twists and turns. Like, I guessed the surprise twist at the end really early on in the book, and it was just, it was a bit predictable, a bit samey to other historical romances, and I didn't know that it really did something unique with the book. However, that being said, I enjoyed it. It was comforting, it was cozy, it was wholesome and sweet, and I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read, I did talk about a little bit in a reading vlog, so I won't talk about it too much here. But that is The Queen's Rising by Rebecca Ross. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know I love Rebecca Ross's writing. She is one of my favourite fantasy writers at the moment, and this was her debut novel, and it was so cosy. Back onto the cozy fantasy trend. I feel like if I could describe my reading taste to you, it's cozy fantasy and classic romance. That is it. That is what I could read forever. In this world, there are people who have talents. So they might have a particular talent for music, or I think there are 5. There's music, art, knowledge, dramatics, and wit. And some people are just born with this innate talent in that skill. And these people are really special to society and trained up to become a master of that skill. and Brianna is in one of these schools, and she just doesn't really have any of these talents, but she's been put in this school kind of for her own protection, and she knows that. She knows she doesn't really have a gift. She knows she's just here for her own safety, but she is still pushing herself to try and become talented in one of these 5 passions. And she each year enrolls in a new one. So like her first year at the school, she's doing dramatics. The next year she's doing art. She goes on. And then eventually in her final year, she chooses knowledge. And this begins to unlock something in her, and unlock some kind of unusual stuff and some realizations about herself and her past. And this book was so lovely. I loved the romance in this book. I thought it was so nice. I really liked the family dynamics in this book as well, and the themes around found family. And most of all, I just love Rebecca Ross's fantasy settings. She just creates the most lovely and cozy and just warm fantasy settings. Think of cottages and roaring fires and smoky chimneys. It's like just those kind of lovely fantasy feels. So really love that. I love escaping into one of her stories. And I believe I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book, after I think about 3 attempts of trying to read this book, I finally finished The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber, which is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart. I had to look on my bookshelves. Even though this took me a few attempts to read, I don't really know why, because this time when I got into it, I absolutely loved it. I was so engrossed in this story. Stephanie Garber just writes those kind of stories where they're so addictive. It kind of doesn't even really matter what's happening in the story. I just love the way she tells a story, the way she twists things and turns things around and makes characters people that you don't think they are, and just really plays with your emotions. And I love her storytelling. And this book was definitely no exception. I won't go into what this book is about because it will spoil the other one, but this is just part of the new spin-off series to the Caraval series. It's a fantasy story filled with magic and romance and all sorts of things. It's just really good. And this book in particular had such a cliffhanger ending. She always does a big cliffhanger ending on her middle books, I think. And yeah, this was definitely a big cliffhanger ending and has made me so excited for the final book, which I think comes out in autumn this year. So I'm really excited for that one now. I then carried on with the Shady Hollow cozy murder mystery series and read the final book in that series, which is Mirror Lake by Janu Black. This is a series of murder mysteries which follow a cast of characters who are all animals, but they're all animals who live as humans. So they run coffee shops and eat pie, and to me that is just so charming and whimsical and lovely. The first book I absolutely adored. The second book I thought was really rubbish, honestly. I thought the storyline was just really bad, and they didn't, I just feel like they didn't quite go for the same coziness as the first book. So then in this third book, I thought the story definitely got better. They definitely did a much better mystery, and I also feel like the coziness of the world was put back into this story. There is a rat who is known in this town for being really eccentric and weird and coming up with all these like weird conspiracy theories. And one day she starts going around telling everyone that her husband is not her husband and somebody has impersonated her husband. And everyone looks at her husband and thinks, he looks exactly like your husband. And so everyone just kind of writes her off as being mad. But our main character, Vera, who is a reporter and kind of our main mystery solver in this series decides to actually take her seriously and try and work out why she might be thinking that this other rat is not really her husband. I think I did guess the ending of this one, but not quite as obviously as in the second one. So I really enjoyed this. I'm glad it picked back up and was enjoyable again. But I still feel like the first book is just the best one. This one I gave a 3 stars. The next book I read was when I was on holiday actually, and at this point it had been about a month since I'd finished Mirror Lake, and I was fully into my pregnancy symptoms, was not able to sit down and read a book and stay awake more than a chapter, and had been just really struggling to get into anything. But I decided to download an easy, cheesy romance novel. So I downloaded When in Rome by Sarah Adams because I'd heard lots of really good things about Sarah Adams' romance books. And this particular one was a retelling of Roman Holiday, the Audrey Hepburn movie, which I have watched but so long ago, so I didn't really get all of the little references, but that was what it's a retelling of. And in this book we follow a pop star who just needs an escape from her busy, stressful life, and she drives to Rome in, I think there's a Rome in some state in America. So she drives to the nearest Rome that she can find, but her car breaks down. And it breaks down right outside of the house of this grumpy man who bakes for a living. And you can kind of see where the story goes. It is so predictable and cheesy, but it was kind of exactly what I needed in that moment. I think I flew through it in about 2 sittings. It was so easy to read. The romance was really nice. Like, it was predictable and easy to guess what was going to happen. And kind of frustrating at times, but I think there's a formula that works in those kind of cheesy romance books, and in this book it definitely worked. So it wasn't anything incredibly special, but it was exactly the kind of thing that I needed in that moment, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a cheesy romance novel that's really quick to read. So yes, I enjoyed that one. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And the final book, and the reason that I sat down to finally film this video today, is House of Many Ways by Diana Wynne Jones, which I literally finished this morning. So this is the final book in the Howl's Moving Castle world. I wouldn't call it a series because they definitely don't follow on from each other. You could read each book in any order really, but Howl and Sophie, the main characters of the first book, do feature a little bit in the other books as well. This one is about a young girl called Charmaine Baker. Her family are bakers, and she is asked to go and house sit for her uncle, maybe her great uncle. And her uncle is known as this, you know, really famous wizard in their kind of village, and he has had this accident. He's had to go off to the elves to be healed of whatever accident has happened. As a result, she goes to house sit for him. When she gets there, she realizes that things are not going to be quite so easy as she imagined, because there is also a young apprentice who has decided that he must stay there as well. So she's got this annoying little boy to deal with. She has a dog to look after. And there is also this big plot in the royal family that she somehow gets swept up in. And I think this was such a lovely children's book. Like, I would have loved reading this as a kid. I felt like that about all of the books in this series, but Howl's Moving Castle had a kind of feel to it where you could read it at any age and really enjoy it. Whereas the other 2 books in the series definitely felt like children's books to me. Like, reading them felt like reading a children's book. And even though I enjoyed them, I didn't get quite the same enjoyment out of them as I did the first book in the series. However, this book, it was just so charming. Again, it's very autumnal. Think, you know, bakeries and libraries and magical wizard houses, and it's just yeah, really lovely and cozy. Back onto the cozy fantasy trend, of course. So yes, I enjoyed this one. I think I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that is all of the books that I have read over March, April, May, June and July. So 5 months of a reading wrap up. 10 books in 5 months is really not very good for me, but also kind of encouraging to know that on average I'm still reading about 2 books a month, even though I'm struggling to read and considering myself in a reading slump. So I'm exactly on track for my 30 books this year. I lowered my reading goal from 50 to 30 at the beginning of this year because I wanted to focus on reading bigger books, which I did at the start of the year, but now I'm just glad that I set it at 30 because I'm on track for that, and it's not going to be too impossible of a challenge for me to accomplish that by the end of this year. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about the books that I've been reading. Let me know down in the comments what you've been reading recently. Have you read a new favourite book? What would you recommend out of the books you've been reading recently? Let me know. I would love your book recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are in this world, and I'll see you very soon with another video.